Hello there, this is James Uscroft, UJames1978, welcoming everyone to another episode of my podcast series, Art Can Change the World, in which I ask my friends to talk about and share the movies, books, TV shows, and what have you, which they believe share a deeply human message or moral, inspire us to care more, help us to question social norms and moral absolutes, give us a new insight into society's issues and problems, help us to perceive marginalised groups in a new light, or otherwise, no matter how they may do so, help to make the world a better place. And in this episode, I am joined by my good friend Misuk.
Good evening, James.
An Asian American who now lives in South Korea and whose YouTube channel is linked down as the underbar, and who's recommended The Girl with Seven Names by Lee Hyun-so, or as we would put her name in English, Hyun-so Lee, an autobiography detailing her surprisingly happy and relatively privileged, yet still disturbing, dark and dangerous childhood in North Korea, her quick visit across the border into China, which left her trapped in that country for 10 years, her eventual escape to South Korea, her struggle to bring her immediate family to South Korea as well, and the challenges that they all faced in adapting to life in the free world. As always, of course, this podcast will inevitably contain spoilers, and having hopefully made that clear, Misuk, please tell us more about the book, why more people should read it in your opinion, and how you think it can help to change the world.
Well, first of all, I got familiar with the whole North Korean refugee situation about 7 years ago, before I came to live in South Korea. And I, of course, have watched YouTube videos of the things that the politicians hide, the spies that look after the travelers, and especially the people, the civilians who actually managed to escape to China first, then through either Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. This is a route that they usually take by buses or shuttles, and also through canoes and boats before they arrive to South Korea. And usually they have received help from the Christian society. So I was just very fascinated with the way that people have escaped and the courage that they had to do such a thing. But it wasn't until my friend who said he knew Hyun-so Lee. So here's a book. You want to read it? And I said, sure. And I was very inspired by her courage, and especially when she didn't know anything and she just was very flexible and very quick to deal with the situations that just happened right in front of her very quickly. So I read this book as if I was watching Korean drama. The book pages just flipped through very, very quickly for me, and I was very surprised at the end when I was done, and I was going, okay, is there a part two? Yeah, really, seriously. And I think now she's in South Korea, and she is actually helping the refugees cope with their lives in South Korea, which is not an easy task. It's a very different life here, where you think that the materialism will actually help them realize that, oh, they have everything now that they didn't have back in their home country. However, it's a lot of missing their families and friends, and also thinking about how their families and friends might be struggling back then because of their, quote, mistake of leaving their own country, because it's a sin what they have done coming to South Korea. So their lives are actually not easy here in South Korea, and a lot of the times they are very stressed, they're very lonely. Making friends is very difficult, as you can see if you are just anybody going to another country to make friends. I don't think it's a very easy task, even though if you have the language, but if you don't have the same mentality and cultural background, I think it is going to be very difficult to create relationships. So I really recommend people to read this book, not because to appreciate the things that we have in our everyday lives, but to have an insight on your actions can have different causations, either pleasant ones or negative ones, not just on you, but on others. But at the same time, this is part of life, and this is part of our experience to help us all grow. Correct? So I just think that whatever happens in life, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. It's your fate and the moment to have these kind of, these teachable and learnable moments.
Yes, just to reiterate what you were saying there to make sure I understood you correctly, beyond being an incredible insight into the daily life, to this one girl's, at the time, daily life in North Korea, the struggle of being an effect, so on and so forth, all of that stuff which we'll talk about in a moment. What you said there was that it's a great insight into how, regardless of whether you have good luck or bad luck, regardless of your situations, you make your own fate, you make your own future. That yes, there are always consequences, good and bad. The important thing is just to keep moving forward, to keep trying to make a better life. One thing that she says towards the end of the book, what you were saying about the struggle that many North Korean defectors face, no matter what we choose, we're going to be permanently cut off from someone who we love.
Yes. Basically what I think is that when Hyung-soo Lee came to South Korea, and she knew she was going to start a second new life, the first one being in China, and then now she's starting another new life. And I wouldn't say she's happy to carry on, but it's just a way to survive. Yeah. And she is facing the consequences of taking responsibility for what she did. She's going to finish it, and she's going to have her life here. But it is contrary to a lot of the North Korean defectors. I'm not saying, I think quite a lot that I've heard of. They came here after the fact that they made efforts in escaping, and that wasn't easy. That wasn't an easy task. But coming here to adapt to their new lives has become such a challenge. And a lot of them actually wanted to go back, and oftentimes they refuse help and just in a sense of giving up.
Yeah.
So I think it is at this point, after reading the book and also talking to her and also watching other documentaries, I actually feel that the hardest task is to adjust to the new life.
Yeah.
When you're escaping, you don't have time to think so much. All you're doing is just run. Of course, you're scared, but then I think the most haunted times would be to start a new life and you don't know what is ahead of you, and making money is difficult, even though the government supports them in many ways, giving them housing and funds. However, it is, like I said, making relationships. You don't know when the two countries are ever going to get unified in their lives. And it's just a lot of insecurities of these North Korean defectors. Yes. That I feel, I do feel some empathy toward them. Yeah, and then I think this is sort of like if I'm to compare this, you can actually see it from when Taiwan and China used to fight the war, and how there were a lot of people who that wouldn't be defecting, that would be moving their military and their families to Taiwan, and for many years that they did not see their relatives. And it was just about, I think, 20 some years ago or 30 years ago when families could be united again. And look now, it's even the Chinese mainlanders, they can go to Hong Kong, and as you know, that Hong Kong used to be part of the UK.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. I'm not so sure with North Korea. It will take a while, but they have basically closed their doors to everyone around the world. And if you can see a lot of other tribes around the world, like the Amazon, those tribes, I think the indigenous people in India, same thing. They are too insecure to let other people in to change their lives.
Yeah, just to clarify that, it's Kim and his regime who are too insecure to let other people come in and change the lives of North Koreans, whose lives would be immeasurably better with trade, with communication. Lee Hyun-soo actually says towards the end, when she's talking about reunification, you're saying there about the separated families never knowing if they're ever going to see each other again. It would be before economic or political reunification. The two Koreas are so divided. What they need is social reunification. Families being able to just go on holiday together would be a massive step forward. Kim is so paranoid. The Kims, first Il Sung, then Jong Il, now Jong Un. They're just so paranoid, so possessive, so they are building. They are. The current situation. This is one question I wanted to leave towards the end. Depending on where you live, if you're in Seoul, how scared are you that there is actually going to be a war just because Kim Jong-un will not let go of power?
Actually, I've lived here for almost 7 years, and while the CNN and other new broadcasters, they always, of course, made the news more exaggerated. Yeah, but in South Korea, we don't feel that way. We don't feel the fear, especially for foreigners, because one indication that we use is the local people. So if the local people don't say anything, then there's nothing to be scared of, because they have dealt with this for a long period of time. Their parents and grandparents went through all this, so it's
another threat of war
here. I mean, it's not as a foreigner, I don't feel being threatened here. I mean, life just still goes on. But I think North Korea has to. Well, I think they also fear their neighbors, and they also fear their neighbors, like especially China, and they are part of what is it called? The resource supporters. So with North Korea, those Kim Jong-un and all the top people, they only care about themselves. I mean, they just kill whoever they want, who might step into their power. And the reason why is that they're actually quite wealthy people up there. And so if they give in, then their houses will be gone and things like that. They're just bullies trying to take things away from the common people. So that's all. They're just a bunch of bullies, So, and we don't know exactly what's happening up there as well, because they don't do a lot of news that we can hear of, or the truth. As you know, that their news it looks very political, and it's
it's not news, it's just propaganda. So
And I just think that North Korea is a little bit different from whereas China back then, where China, I don't think they really had those prison camps. Yes, they really had a communist system where people were controlled, but I think the way that they control in North Korea is very, very primitive in a way that it's just to scare people and also using them for testing on gases and etc. You know, so I think for them to be reunified with South Korea, that's going to take a long process. I think socially, even though if they get back together, I don't think it's going to be as easy like East and West Germany at the time. I think there's a lot of financial burden that's going to go on South Korea. And you can say that South Korea has really come along over the 20, 30 years, but it still has its struggles. And of course, the people right now in South Korea, they're struggling to have a proper president, and we just got one impeached just several days ago.
Yes, impeached, but in the wrong country. Sorry, take a shot.
Well, yeah, it's true. And you know, while people are celebrating here for her impeachment, they're having beer and chicken. But
can we go 2 for 2? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, people are getting off work, and yesterday was their big celebration to celebrate that, because a lot of people, they went to the peaceful demonstrations and the protest, and they went for a long time. I mean, this is a lot of dedication. I think one thing I always tell people is don't mess with the Koreans. I mean, make friends with them. I mean, they're awesome, very, very nice people. But at the same time, is if you step on them, yeah, you better watch out. Doesn't matter who you are. They just hold grudges, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, so it's kind of interesting that, you know, I'm very, I don't know. I think it's worth to praise how the South Koreans have been protesting together. I mean, they're a very unified country. They really know how to cooperate through these parades. It is very well organized. No violence. I mean, just a lot of angry people, but it was still very demonstrated in a very diplomatic and sophisticated fashion. But I think this type of mentality is not going to match with the North Korean. It's going to take a long time. I mean, if we can,
Lee Hyun-soo, towards the end of the book, when she's herself was adjusting to life in South Korea, people can protest openly without being publicly executed.
Yes.
They can stand on the steps of the government building chanting their grievances and not be shot dead. That was such an alien concept to her. She says towards the end, the biggest problem in North Korea is that no one has any concept of rights. They don't know that they're abusing them. They don't know that they're being abused because the concept of rights is alien to them. So that's one of the things she's trying to help instill in North Korean defectors working with reunification, because towards reunification, because if the North Korean people understand, yes, we have rights and the Kim regime is abusing them, then what you were saying about South Korea, when the people are united, no government can stand against them. So when the North Koreans finally figure out, hey, we're being... This is why the Kim regime, as we were saying before, locks off the entire world. No communication, no South Korean television, absolutely nothing. Because the second they figure out, hey, there is a world outside and it's so much better than this, we want a piece of that. Kim knows, Kim and his regime know that they are dead. Politically, if not literally.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna make a little comparison. I think it's not just about like a country. For example, if you have a family, and I know that you have written a lot of stories with violence in the families, and I think it's the same thing where you can say that a father or a mother or just anybody who is have more seniority in the family dominates the kids in a negative way, and if you lock them in that same house and not go out for a long time, and they might think that, oh, this is the way that the violence, it's a very normal way that my parents treat me by hitting me or something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's just human nature to it's very interesting, but once you are outside of the box, you want more, of course.
Using that to segue into talking about the first part of the book, because I do think we went kind of off topic there. So getting back to the book itself, which is what we're supposed to be talking about. In part one, when Lee Hyun-soo talks about her childhood in North Korea, as I mentioned in the introduction, it was relatively happy. It was relatively prosperous. All of this evil was going on around her. And especially when she was very young in kindergarten, this was normal. This is just the way that the world is. Yeah, it's the South Koreans who are impoverished and tyrannized by the Yankee bastards. They're the ones who can't grow rice because the soil is like cracked deserts. We are the greatest country on earth. Saying that she attended her first public execution when she was 7, which is the most horrifying part of that sentence. The fact that she was 7 years old, or the fact that it was only her first. One thing, though, whilst the Kim regime struggled to impose power to rule through terror, and it's supposed to be a communist system, at least according to the kind of Western American idea of communism, which is more similar to fascism. It is so corrupt. This is something that my friend Gina, a Korean American still living in America, couldn't understand when we were. In another podcast linked down as the Underbar, I shared with her the film Crossing, which is similar. It's similar. It deals with the same things as The Girl with Seven Names, the book by Lee Hyun-soo. It's about a father and son struggling to be reunited after the father goes to China to get medicine for his wife, the boy's mother, but then is stuck. Unable to get back. He's eventually sent to South Korea. No, I need to get back to North Korea. That's where my family is.
May I ask what book that is?
Oh, it's a film called Crossing. So I'll link, as I say, I'll link to the podcast discussing it down in the description, and I'll send you a link to the film as soon as we finish the podcast.
Thank you.
One of the things that Gina was horrified by was the fact that it's so corrupt. The son, Jun, was sentenced to a labour camp because he had tried to cross into China to find his father, to which a South Korean broker just came into North Korea, handed over a huge wad of bills, a huge wad of money, and he was let out. What? How does it work like that? Well, no. One thing throughout the book, bribery and smuggling is just a way of life. What we were saying before about the difficulty North Koreans having to have with South Korea. In North Korea, crystal meth is used as a face wash to treat acne. And a pick-me-up. Oh, I've got a couple of kilos of crystal meth. Her mother calling her in China. Do you know anyone in China who can sell it? Omar, that's highly illegal. Yeah,
Yes, yes,
everything's highly illegal in North Korea. Can't you just bribe someone?
yes.
Oh, all throughout the first part of the book, her mother and the rest of her family. One thing I noticed in the book is that Lee Hyun-soo always refers to her family, who are still in North Korea, by nicknames: Uncle Poor, Aunt Pretty,
Yes.
Aunt Tall, Uncle Cinema, and most of all, Uncle Opium.
Oh, yes, that Uncle Opium.
Her uncle was a heroin dealer she was 3 years when she was about 7 years old. Oh, this huge black brick of tar heroin. Oh, just stick in your pen and take a piece. What do I do with it? Eat it. And yeah, I had colds. I had a cold at the time, but my symptoms cleared up in minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, North Koreans, give your children heroin to cure that. What? But yeah, even someone who's pro, even as someone who's pro. Who's pro decriminalisation is against the demonisation of drugs across the world, which causes far more problems than the drugs themselves. You know, even I'm looking at the culture, the way that they treat narcotics and so forth, after years of drugs are evil brainwashing. And how can you think like this? And you know, the only crime, this is the thing though, the only crimes in North Korea are political. So dealing heroin, dealing crystal meth, it's not a problem. The only question is, do you have enough money to bribe the police, the officials, the Puibu, etc.? The biggest problem, the biggest threat to their family came when her father committed suicide.
Yes.
If you remember, because
Yes.
in North Korea, suicide is an act of protest. It is
Yes.
seen as a form of a form of defection. You kill yourself to escape the regime, and no one should ever want to escape the regime
Right.
because this is the greatest country on earth. So,
But I recall his death was questionable as well.
oh
Correct?
no, he did.
Was it-
The way it's reported in the book, yes, he had committed suicide by taking
Right.
Prozac.
But it was very questionable whether it it was staged, meaning that.
Oh,
I'm not
yeah,
sure.
because
I'm not so sure.
yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
He had been imprisoned and tortured.
Yeah.
Because officially because of trading illegally with China or some other political crime, but no.
So I'm not so sure. Yeah, it's been a. Let's see. The last time I think I finished the book last summer or so. Yeah, I recalled that her father's death was very questionable, and I think they were not allowed to ask their mom about it too much because the mother wanted to protect them as well.
Yeah,
but
whether it was actually a suicide or they just made it look like suicide, the point was that the family was now under threat because if the father, if it was reported that the father had committed suicide, their Songbun would now be hostile and they would be sent to a collective farm or a prison camp for the rest of their lives. Just to explain for people who are listening, Songbun, as Lee Hyun-soo explains in the book, is the North Korean caste system with Kim Jong-un at the very top and political prisoners in the zone of no return in the gulags, who's not only them but their children and their grandchildren will live and die there. Because they have committed the crime, the heresy of using a bit of newspaper with a photo of the great leader on it as kindling or to roll a cigarette. You know, that's the kind of crime that's punishable. Whilst theft and bribery are everywhere, and heroin is smuggled and crystal meth is smuggled by impunity, impugning the name of the great leader. sentences your grandchildren to life imprisonment unborn. But yeah, so the whole point of the story was saying that Hyun-soo and her family were relatively privileged. They were both families of the family had high Songbun because
Yes.
So the threat that as Hyun-soo Lee put it in the book, it's almost impossible to rise in the system, but very easy to fall. So once again, her mother had to go around bribing everyone she could to get the hospital records changed to say that that her father died of a heart attack, not suicide, because then they would be safe. And even when I remember, even when Hyun-soo's mother, Hyun-soo finally persuades her mother to escape to South Korea to be with her. She once again she bribes officials to fake her death,
Yes.
so that her family. The constant bribery, the total corruption in Laos as well, which we might get on to discussing in the book. These are supposed to be communist countries, but they are they have the worst forms of capitalism imaginable.
Yes, I mean, this is it's like that, you know, when people need to survive, they need to survive. They'll do whatever.
Yeah, that was something else that Gina raised when we were talking about crossing. The fact that when Jun and a little girl called Misun, about his age, were struggling to survive because their father, Jun's father, was in China, mother dead, no money, no house, literally living on the streets. Why aren't the other children helping them? Why are they robbing them, screwing them over, stealing from them? If I can just find the quote quickly. Kind people who put others before themselves would be the first to die.
I think what you're saying is that when you want to protect yourself or other people, and that is the only way to survive, is to keep yourself alive. Mm-hmm. I think anybody would do anything to justify that they have to do harm to others in order to protect their lives. Mm-hmm. I think that is nature, unless you want to give up and you just die yourself and you will not hurt other people, but then that cycle will continue with another person trying to stay alive and you know, do harm to other people.
Yes,
I think it's almost like if you put a lot of rats in a cage and you will see which one will get bitten get bitten until the last one survive, you know, to get their space. It's just interesting what she has to witness through her life and also experience. I don't think she would have ever imagined that her life would be what it is right now. And she's in fact married to a foreigner, which I don't think she would ever imagine to marry a, quote, foreign devil, as the North Koreans would state, and also have her mom and brother living with her in South Korea. I think this is past beyond imaginable for her.
What you were saying there about the difference between her life then and her life now, the point in her life in which she describes in the book when things began to change for her in her mind rather than in reality, because by this point she herself was already living in South Korea but was still distrustful of everyone, still keeping on her North Korean mask, as she described it,
Yes.
always being suspicious. In North Korea, I'd learned from my mother that to trust anyone outside of the family is risky and dangerous. Not only did I believe that humans are selfish and base, I also knew that plenty of them were actually bad, content to destroy lives for their own gain. So what Dick had done, this Australian backpacker who she meets, and with no prompting, for no reason, not wanting anything in return, but because at this point she's in Laos, since her mother and her brother are being held there by Laotian authorities who were refusing to let them go to South Korea. He just gave her all of the money that she needed to bribe the local officials to get them out. He showed me there was a world where strangers help strangers for no other reason than it is good to do so, and where callousness was unusual, not the norm. Dick had treated me as if I were his family or an old friend. Even now, I don't grasp his motivation, but from the day I met him, the world was a less cynical place. I started feeling warmth for other people. This seems so natural, and yet I'd never felt it before.
Yes, I think that was a time when she started to realize people outside of her own race.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about how the North Korean, being North Korean, that is her race number one, right?
Yep.
That she ever had encountered. Then going to China, then dealing with the Chinese, and of course all the corruption that happened. I think that was all she had ever encountered. Then going to Laos, dealing with the Laotians, and then finally a foreigner. I think that that would be the least expected person to help her ever in her life.
Yes, remember.
Because all this time, like North Koreans, as you know, like they always talk about the foreign barbarians, right?
Yeah.
The foreigners, but none of the Asian people from capitalist countries were ever being criticized, but only the foreigners, right? Especially the Americans.
Yeah.
So that for her, I mean, somebody who might have different eye color and hair color, that I think that was what probably opened up her eyes into being more open-minded in her life. So I just think it's very interesting how things in life, just one moment, it could be that one angel, I would call it, that helped her. And she decided, wow, that's the time that she needs to change her perspective on how she should perceive foreigners and how she should preach others to think differently than what she was raised to think of other people other than her race.
Dick, the Australian backpacker who helped her family to escape prison in Laos, he not only helped them, but all of Hyun-soo's current work helping North Korean defectors, trying to break down the stigma against North Korean defectors, the bias and the prejudice and the discrimination, which I'll want to talk about in a minute, and opening her, as you say, opening her eyes so that she would eventually marry an American jackal, as the North Korean propaganda calls it. I tried so hard not to laugh towards the end of the book. Hyun-soo's brother Minho and mother meeting her fiancé for the first time at a restaurant. Yes. What the
Yeah, yes. Because as you know, the person who had helped her all along in China toward the end was her former boyfriend, who was a South Korean. Mm-hmm. So he also supported her into rescuing her mom and her brother and going over to see them at the border. So he had been an avid supporter of her as well, but unfortunately, due to family background differences, that I don't think the South Korean boy could have, the family could have accepted her. But I think it is a very interesting twist at the end of the story, how it turned out that you think that by coming to South Korea that she will probably meet a South Korean boy, but that just turned out to be the opposite. And it's just very interesting that I'm just wondering, had she not met the Australian helper, the rescuer, whether she would be marrying her current husband because of the change of perspective on what foreigners could be like.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and what as I just mentioned a moment ago, one of the things that the book discusses that Hyun-soo is now devoting her life to fighting against is discrimination against North Koreans, because in South Korea, education is everything. I did actually make a video on YouTube, Peak Education, talking about how
academics is everything here. Academics is a priority.
Yeah, but the problem is congratulations, you have a university degree just like 80% of the population. So now you need a master's degree, you need to be able to speak English, you need all of these other skills as well just to be able to stand out from the crowd to get the top job. 100 other applicants all have the same qualifications that you have.
That's why all try to get to Samsung, LG, and the bigger cooperation in Hyundai, which is the three big in Korea. So it's really interesting how you bring that up, because it is, as you see that there are a lot of cram schools and the children have been prepared by the parents to go through college, and the next thing is to get the job in the high levels in these big corporations and get married and have a good life. And then the cycle repeats again. Yes.
That's why I call it peak education. There are only so many jobs. Not everyone can be the CEO of Samsung or even get a job at Samsung. So running faster and faster just to stand still. But beyond that, though. The problem then for North Koreans coming to South Korea is that their education exists almost entirely of learning the glory of the respected father leader and the dear leader, and performing in mass games, the big demonstrations to celebrate the dear leader's birthday, the respected father leader's birthday, and so on and so forth. So their education is worthless when they come to South Korea, and as we've discussed, people without a degree in South Korea might as well be dead. Well, not literally.
Well, and another thing that the North Koreans have to learn here are the social cues, and being raised in a different country and a different background, even though they speak pretty much the same language, but the dialects are really different. If you think about just South Korea itself, like people that are outside of Seoul get discriminated because of their different accent and different micro-ethnic groups or cultural backgrounds. Yeah, you get really discriminated here if you're just slightly different here. So needless to say, the North Koreans coming here, that's gonna be even more difficult. It's very challenging for them.
And talking there about language, Hyun-soo mentioned it in her book, the fact that, yes, she speaks the same language, but what do you mean when you say, when a Korean says he's leaving his apartment to take a taxi to go to a meeting? What are the, because it's like Japanese loan words.
It's all loan, yes.
In Seoul, in particular, American culture has taken over so completely. There was a Korean comedy film, it wasn't very good, called Please Teach Me English, about how English is taking over Korea so much that native Koreans who don't know any English at all are being left out. What we were saying before about it. What we were saying before about everyone struggling to be number one to get the top jobs at Samsung and Hyundai. No, if you don't speak English, you might as well hang a sign around your neck saying unclean, do not hire.
Well, and a lot of the things is that there's a lot of connections going on here too. So families, they pull each other together to help each other out. So for example, maybe in the company, maybe it could be an uncle who could get the nephew without any skill to come in. You never know.
So that might be another reason why Hyun-soo and her very prosperous, very almost kind of South Korean drama character boyfriend Kim, that's one reason why it couldn't work out between them, because he was from a top family. I think he worked at Samsung. He was the kind of the South Korean ideal, and she was just a defector from North Korea. All of his friends, everyone he knew, was part of what you say, the circle of the rich South Korean, the top Seoul families who work in the big corporations and in politics and so on and so forth. So even if it wasn't the fact that she was, if it's not necessarily the fact that she was North Korean, but she had the way Hyun-soo described it in the book, she had no back, meaning no background. She wasn't connected. She had no family, no connections in South Korean industry. So Kim probably went off and married the daughter of one of the top executives at Hyundai, regardless of whether they had any feelings for her. Because that's the weird thing. Just like the Kim dynasty, this is a weird kind of parallel. Although we think of North Korea and South Korea as being completely different, they're both supposed to be equal. In North Korea, because it's all supposed to be equal. Anyone's supposed to be able to succeed in North Korea because it's supposed to be communist. In South Korea, because it's supposed to be a free market. It's supposed to be capitalism, the land of opportunity. But still, in both North and South, it's family dynasty. It's in the North, it's your Songbun. In the South, it's your family connections that decide how successful you are. I thought that was an interesting parallel, the way it works in the two countries, and in America and in Britain as well. It's not about what you know; it's about who you know, who you're related to. But moving on, though, we've talked about the first part of the book and the third, the beginning and the end. But reading the second part of the book, the way that she crosses into China, not necessarily by accident, but she planned to go to China for a few days, ended up staying for 10 years. And as a North Korean defector, unable to return because the Puibu knew that she was missing. If she'd come back, she would have been tortured and imprisoned. When she was trying to go back, her mother called her, "Don't come back, the Puibu know." That's the only reason why she didn't go back to North Korea. But in China, always the incredible good luck, but at the same time the incredible bad luck that she had at every turn. And one thing I think he said before we started recording the podcast, it was like a Korean drama. And yes, it was the way that she gets into and out of all of these incredible situations. So it almost makes the book. The old saying, "The truth is stranger than fiction." So it almost makes it seem unbelievable. So,
well, it's just I think the events happened very quickly, and she just dealt with it as she went along. Mm-hmm. I think if you're given a situation like that where the environment could be really seedy, where she was at. I think anything can happen. There's gonna be darts shooting at you left and right and behind, and you're gonna shield yourself in several different directions. And I think that's how her life was when she was in China. And there's just a lot of people in that area, especially where Korean defectors usually stay, and there's a lot of girls that get into prostitution.
Yeah.
And she was very lucky to have escaped that. Yeah. Actually, I wouldn't say escape, it's more like duck. She ducked herself and got away from it.
Yeah.
And a lot of things, just because I believe that she was very street smart. Mm-hmm. And she had to use her tricks, and she had the skills and also the right timing and the luck. And all these elements mixed together, and she got to the next level. It's almost like a video game.
Yeah, it's there's a American film starring Nicolas Cage, Red Rock West. The difference being that is entirely fictional. But it's basically the same kind of story, with terrible luck being followed by good luck, which turns into terrible luck, and he just keeps, as you say, keeps leveling up and so on and so forth. But while, as I say, the truth is stranger than fiction, so whilst this seems unbelievable, I think the fact that a lot of it does seem, because she is so lucky, so much of the time, you couldn't make this up. So, the fact that it's unbelievable makes it more believable. And what you were saying as well about how she manages to escape human traffic, or as you say, duck out of human trafficking. She's a witness to so many of the horrors, the terrible things that happen to other North Korean defectors around her. But she always somehow manages to escape the worst of it herself. She's not unscathed by any stretch of the imagination. She suffers a great deal, but compared to other North Korean defectors, there was one woman, Soo Jin, with whom she was friendly. The last time Hyun-soo saw her, she'd been taken back from China to North Korea, tortured and beaten by the Puibu. She just managed to escape again to North Korea, and was beaten, scarred, terrified, and starving. And I can't take this anymore. I'm trying to head to South Korea. And Hyun-soo never saw her again. And you were saying before about sex work. While she was in South Korea, she started talking online to other defectors. One of whom said, "Do you have a webcam?" And when they talked over webcam to prove that she wasn't a Puibu agent, she was naked. Oh, I'm a cyber sex. I do phone sex. I do cyber sex. Most of the brokers who help women escape, they're human traffickers. It was either this or prostitution or being sold off as a bride to an impoverished Chinese farmer.
Yes.
And just and Hyun-soo actually says herself in the book, imagine when I was 18, I thought the worst thing in the world was that my aunt and uncle, who I'd been living with for 2 years, wanted to marry me off to this relatively affluent but boring Chinese man.
Yes, yeah.
So, talking about human trafficking though, and blind luck, when she crossed the border into China once again, because her family had contacts, because she was friendly with the guards, because of bribery and corruption. There were two families, two traders, Chinese traders, with whom her mother worked, who she could have gone to. One of them, Mr. Arn, helped her, took her to Chongyang, I think the name of the city was, helped her find her aunt and uncle. She wanted to stay for a few days, forced to stay for 10 years. The other house she could have gone to was the house of a human trafficker, who ended up in prison for 10 years and died in prison. Yeah, so if the fact that if she'd just gone to the other house, she would be a sex slave or the slave bride of a Chinese farmer, or if she was lucky, doing cyber sex or phone sex. But yeah. The struggle, North Korea. As I say, whilst Hyun-soo's journey through China and South Korea was relatively unscathed, as I say, the book does talk about the nightmare that so many other North Koreans face, including her own family. So another thing we were talking about just before the podcast, Misuk, the possibility of a different escape route. If you want to explain your thoughts about that when you met Hyun-soo.
Well, I'm not so sure, but when before reading the book, was that I used to watch documentaries and also learning that a lot of the escapees, they went to China first through the Yalu River, then down to the south of China into Vietnam and Laos, then into Bangkok, I think. So it's all the Mekong River route that they end up in Thailand, then sent back by the South Korean consulate in Bangkok into South Korea. So that's the usual route that I knew of. So, but Hyun-soo Lee, from what she said was that she stayed in China for 10 years, got different types of documentations and identifications that were fake, but ended up with a passport and successfully got into South Korea through just a plane ride. So that surprised me. So what I was going to ask her was how did she think that her way of escaping from China to South Korea could benefit could benefit other escapees who are currently in China now. But I think because of language problems, or I think she misunderstood me, or my question was stated differently at the time, was that she thought I was asking about the route from North Korea to China through the Yalu River route or through the mountains. So she didn't quite answer my question. So hopefully if I get to see her again, maybe that would be an inquiry that I would like to ask her one more time.
Yes, and in the meantime, though, just going from what I read in the book, so I'm not an expert. Don't take this as gospel. I hope that if you are able to meet her again, then Hyun-soo might have a different answer. But I think the main reason why she was able to take this short, easy route. One interrogator, the interrogator of the NIS, who confirmed that she was a North Korean defector before she was allowed to resettle in Seoul, actually said she was in the 1% who'd gotten here easily, precisely because she had lived in China for 10 years. She had paid not just for a fake ID, but for the ID of a Chinese Korean girl who had a mental illness, so was now in a hospital, so now couldn't use it. So she could use that borrowed identity, and with that ID in Shanghai, she was able to make contact, so on and so forth. It got to the point where literally, when she arrived in Incheon International Airport and said that she was a North Korean seeking asylum, everyone suspected her. Everyone thought that she was Chinese, Chinese Korean, pretending to be North Korean in order to trick the South Koreans into giving her citizenship. Look, just tell us the truth. If you walk away now, that we won't press charges. But if we find out. If we find out that you are Chinese, there's going to be trouble.
But I'm just wondering how much that, even though she is under that 1%, I'm just wondering how much by living in China, that provided a nice foundation or transition for her before coming into South Korea.
Yeah, that's,
you know what I mean?
That's what was confusing me, I think, because she was doing this on her own. What if the Christian associations like Father Kim, who helped her family to escape, what if they were to try to go through that route instead of relying on, as other women put it, the human traffickers who take them all the way through China and then through Laos or Thailand or Vietnam? Would that be an easier and safer way rather than risking putting them into the hands of sex traffickers?
I just think that she was very lucky in general, because she was raised with a pretty good education, whereas I think some of the North Koreans escapees, I don't think they have enough background, so maybe that's how they land in some of the lower end jobs.
Yeah.
I think that might be it.
Oh, sorry.
Not all, but...
Sorry, I'm afraid that was a bit of a non sequitur. I was talking about a different way of escaping, and then you started talking. Yeah. Well, there is so much that I want to talk about. There are so many incredibly interesting insights and events in the book. But the problem is, if I make the podcast too long, then nobody will watch it.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up the podcast, though, Misuk, one quote which truly stood out for me was, sympathetic people I'd met in China would sometimes express their bewilderment that the Kim dynasty had been tyrannising North Korea for almost 6 decades. How does that family get away with it? Just as baffling, how do their citizens go on coping? In truth, there is no dividing line between cruel leaders and oppressed citizens. The Kims rule by making everyone complicit in a brutal system, implicating all from the highest to the lowest, blurring morals so that no one is blameless. A terrorised party cadre would terrorise his subordinates, and so on down the chain. A friend will inform on a friend out of fear of punishment for not informing. A nicely brought up boy will become a border guard who kicks to death a girl caught trying to escape to China because her Songbun has sunk to the lowest level, and she's worthless and hostile in the eyes of the state. Ordinary people are made persecutors, denouncers, and thieves. They use the fear flowing from the top to win some advantage or to survive. And although he was Chinese and not from North Korea, I was seeing a prime example of this criminal in front of me. I was seeing a prime example in this criminal in front of me, standing inches from my face. He had it in his power to rescue people, to be a hero. Instead, he was using the terror of the regime to benefit himself and add to the misery of others. He had me on a cliff edge. Pay me or I push. Going back to what I was saying about human traffickers and so on and so forth, and what we were saying before about the Kim regime in general, and the fact that it's only the ruthless and selfish who survive in North Korea. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Few words.
Yeah.
Power, in a negative way.
Yeah.
Greed, to hurt others, to benefit oneself. I think that's all I can say about North Korean leaders at this point. Hello?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I think they probably have their want to survive. Mm-hmm. So to protect the greed, they need to sacrifice others. Yeah.
But
so
go ahead.
So I think different people have different needs and wants, mm-hmm. and different people want to exhibit their powers in different ways. I just think that it is very unfortunate that in North Korea that it is the way it is right now, with the leaders abusing their powers to hurt their own citizens. And if they're doing something like that, they're basically not only mistreating their citizens, but to value them to be less than a penny's worth. Mm-hmm. And I think that is very unfortunate, but there are people like that in the world. There's billions of people around the world, and it's just unfortunate that it's just that one group of bullies who decide to do this to other people.
Yeah. What you were saying there a moment ago, though, Misuk, about billions of people around the world who are like this, I think that goes to the heart of the quote, because it's not just about the system in North Korea itself, although it is the evil selfishness of the Kim regime which has turned everyone below them evil in a domino effect. You have to do this to survive. The people at the top terrorize the people below, terrorize the people below them, terrorize the people below them, and at the very bottom are the people in the prison camp who were tortured and executed. But I was thinking, going back to the human traffickers, the whole point of this is that these were quote-unquote brokers. Remember, brokers are criminals, they're human traffickers. They have the power to help, but instead they use that power to blackmail, to exploit, to benefit themselves.
Yes, but the thing is that let's say, if you put your feet in their shoes, I'm pretty sure these people are also doing it as a survival method. Because if you think about, okay, so they're trafficking people, they're making money, they have families to support, or they just are greedy. Of course they are greedy. But if you're saying that, okay, ways to help them, then how are they going to make money to feed their families by helping in what ways? If there are ways, I'm pretty sure that they will go do it, right? But the unfortunate thing about the world is that oftentimes people will look for something to benefit themselves, put themselves before others, and that's why the world is the way it is, because we lack empathy.
Indeed, Miss Hook, I believe that was the entire point of the quote, so I'm worried that maybe we're talking in circles here. And as much as I would love to continue talking about this book for the rest of the night, I do believe that you have to be getting on with something else. So, once again, thank you very much for recommending this book. And until the next episode, when I'll be discussing another work of art with another friend, and Yon.